Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. In our last video about true believers of the Empire, a lot of you guys commented that I missed a bunch of very worthy candidates, and you guys are completely right. I apologize. I am really enjoying making these videos, but because of the current situation going on right now, time is fleeting. But you, the fans, have always been my greatest resource and inspiration. Especially you, Steve. We're both grown men looking at each other, not wearing pants, and that's what America's all about. All right, let's get this video going. Valentins, God, where do they get guys like this? Even if he weren't wearing the Imperial Greys, you could tell this guy burns down alien villages and eats babies for fun. He's so stereotypically Imperial looking that he probably joined the Empire because the rebels would have shot him on sight. Pure evil facial structure. Sorry, just channeling my internal Migs Mayfield. His voice, it feels and speaks for all of us men who are confused and angered by the world around us. Anyway, enough talk about facial structures. Let's take a look at the man, General Valentins. What makes him so unique? He is an Imperial Navy. He also is an Imperial Stormtrooper. Instead, he's actually a part of the Imperial Army. Now, here on Earth, the Army is usually considered the largest body of most militaries, I guess unless you're like an island nation. And that's because most battles take place on ground. But in Star Wars, space takes up the massive majority of the galaxy, and so the Imperial Navy was the premier organization within the military, and the Stormtroopers were a specialized light infantry-focused organization that had its own independent command chain but operated within a larger military branch. It's sort of like the US Marines, but the Stormtroopers, instead of being attached to the Navy, are actually attached to the Army. The Imperial Army were the main ground forces of the Empire, and they were kind of considered a lower tier and lower quality organization. They're basically used to fill garrisons and guard occupied territories. If you thought Stormtroopers were expendable, well, wait till you see these guys in action. Cannon fodder, completely. They're the ones doing trench warfare against the Milanese, for instance. Now, Valentins was a general in the Imperial Army, and he was one of the many fanatics who chose to stay on with the Empire even after Emperor Palpatine died. And yes, like many fanatics, he loved the idea of Operation Cinder, a scorched earth policy designed as a punishment against the Empire for its failure to protect the Emperor. Valentins was in charge of operations over Burnin Khan, one of the many worlds that the Empire wanted to punish. This was an incredibly bloody battle, and Valentins ended up sacrificing an entire division in order to accomplish his mission. That's around 10 to 15,000 people. Sharpshooter Migs Mayfield was at this incident and witnessed countless members of his unit die a needless death for a dead Empire and Emperor. This was the moment that awoken him to the horrors of what was actually going on. Ultimately, Valentins was way too comfortable over all the deaths he had caused. He wasn't just a true believer, he's actually just a psychopath who likes killing people. And so while raising his cup to toast the Empire, Mayfield shoots him out of the blue. Justice served. So why is my time limited? Well, I'm actually here in Poland trying to help out with the Ukrainian humanitarian crisis. I'm trying to raise awareness, but I'm also trying to research various organizations and charities that are aiding the Ukrainian defense. That's because when I send you guys out to donate to places, I want to know exactly where the money is going, and I know a lot of you guys work really hard for your money, so I want to make sure there's minimum corruption and minimal overhead costs. And so a few nights ago, I had the privilege of meeting some of the fine folks involved with the grassroots logistics movement known as Army SOS. Officially listed by the Ukrainian government as a charity that supports their cause, they've been active since 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea and the Donbass region. The sheer amount of stuff they've provided for the Ukrainian defense is crazy, and we'll be releasing small pieces of a longer interview I had with them highlighting the various and surprisingly creative work they've been doing protecting their soldiers. So meet Tanya. When I recorded this, she had just come back from Ukraine working on this exact project she's talking about.
So we decided to help a little bit to our territorial defense, and we are buying cars, armored cars. It's used cars from banks, but they got very nice protection. That protection can survive from Kalashnikov. It's 7.92 bullet. It's nice armor. We buy them from United Kingdom. It's not costing much, but it really can save a life because that car can bring help to the town which is blocked. 20-25 people can be easily put in that car. It's a heavy car. And nice that it got in England, they're driving from right side. And the Russian army, then they're shooting our corridors, shooting our civil people. They're shooting left side, they're thinking it's driver, but driver from other side. That's why it's a good idea. It's like bonus. Nowadays, we got 6 of them in England, but we are looking for more.
Army SOS provides equipment, communications, and some very interesting technology to the Ukrainian military. All of this is non-lethal aid. Please check out the description below for more information. Inferno Squad was considered an elite Imperial Special Forces commando unit. It's what you and I here in the States would call a Tier 1 Special Missions unit. But the reality was this unit operated more like an intelligence service direct action unit, like the CIA's Special Activities Division. Matt Damon. That's because Inferno Squad wasn't a part of the regular military. Instead, it operated underneath the command of Inspector General Garrick Versio of the Imperial Security Bureau. You might remember him from our last video. In Battlefront 2, you play as Iden Versio in more direct combat roles while she's in Inferno Squad, but when the organization was first founded, it was actually designed to go deep undercover and infiltrate and destroy terror organizations from within. One of the first jobs that Inferno Squad had was to infiltrate and destroy a militant group known as the Dreamers. They had carried out several terrorist attacks across the galaxy, and they were originally spawned from Saw Gerrera's partisan group. This type of work required a lot of independence and individuality from the agents, which is actually a rarity in the Galactic Empire military and even in the intelligence services. And so the individuals placed in these positions not only had to be extremely competent, but they really had to be very, very loyal to the Empire. Unfortunately, being smart and independent and also being loyal to a dictatorship are usually not found in the same vessel. And so 2/3 of Inferno Squad, Del Meeko and Iden Versio, were smart enough to see the Empire for what it actually was. Most good Imperials saw the needless destruction of Operation Cinder as a step way too far. But the third member of Inferno Squad, Gideon Hask, was a true believer. And this all started out when he was a kid. At the age of 10, living in a quad, his parents were killed in a rebel terrorist bombing in the quad shipyards. With his parents gone, he would substitute them first for a life in the future Imperial Leaders Military Prep School, and then eventually as a member of Inferno Squad. Gideon Hask didn't seem evil at first. He truly cared about his squad mates, who were basically the only family he knew. But when Inferno Squad split apart due to Admiral Garrick Versio's command to destroy his own homeworld of Vardos, Gideon Hask decided to follow through with the order. Ultimately, this man found purpose within the Empire and also a family. His deeply rooted hatred for rebels is justified because of the terrorist attack that killed his original family. From his point of view, the Empire saved him and provided him with everything he needed. To question the Empire would be to question his own existence because the two, unfortunately, were the same. Gideon Hask would serve in the Empire all the way through the Battle of Jakku, and then he would join the First Order as a high-ranking officer. He would eventually die a terrible death in the hands of Iden Versio. He would fall off a catwalk into a pit of a hyperdrive core, very similar to how his Emperor died the first time around. Now, we talked about Dark Disciples in our last video. It's a highly underrated Star Wars novel that also happens to outline a terribly messed up assassination plot of Count Dooku, created by the Jedi. It was the last year of the war, and the Jedi were basically moonlighting as Sith Lords at that point. Once you start getting creative with killing things with the Force, you basically have embraced the dark side. And also the fun side. Another book that I highly recommend is Lost Stars. Yes, this is a young adult novel, and it has many cringy elements you might find in other novels in the same genre. But it is truly an excellent book at the same time. It showcases the journey of two Imperial cadets from their local academy to deployment during the most intense years of the Galactic Civil War. We actually get to see many famous events like the Battle of Yavin from the Imperial point of view. Now, because this is a young adult novel, it also follows these cadets through the Imperial Academy system, which is very similar to Hunger Games. And one of their classmates is an individual known as Nash Windrider. Very cool name. He was a skilled pilot and a very skilled officer, and he had a really bright future ahead of him. Unfortunately, he was Alderaanian, and he was also on the Death Star for a visit when the superweapon turned his planet into ash. When it happened, he was frozen in shock. His entire family was on that flat disk world, and had it not been for the kind actions of his fellow officer Sienna Ree, who whisked him away quickly to his quarters, the ISB probably would have caught him looking sad and then, tortured him. I'm sure every Alderaanian in the Empire would be closely watched from that day on. The Empire is great at isolating individuals and making people fear other service members. The Empire had taken everything from Nash in one shot, and so all he really had left in the world was a future in the Imperial military. Nash was broken and afraid. He would cut off the long braid that symbolized his Alderaanian heritage. He would adopt the official narrative that Alderaan had been harboring terrorists and weapons. He would eventually pour himself into his work, His coworkers would see him as a workaholic, and he would basically turn into some kind of robotic, empty shell. Like Gideon Haas, the Empire became Nash Windrider's identity. The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand is seen as the event that kicked off World War I. But the reality was alliances had already been made, and most of these major powers were really looking forward to a large conflict. There was an uptick in nationalist fervor and patriotism. Most of these major powers involved had drastically increased their military budgets in the decades leading up to the conflict. Germany alone, in the year before the war, increased their defense budget by like 74%. And an arms race had bolstered the confidence of militaries on both sides. They really wanted to use these new toys they had, like mechanized vehicles, terrifying dreadnoughts, and even airplanes. The problem was that all of the sides had these new toys of destruction, and while the technology had changed, the tactics and military culture, and most of these powers had not. And so offensive actions became increasingly rare after the opening moments of the war, as both sides sustained horrendous casualties. And soon the Western Front became incredibly static as both sides started digging in, and you started seeing the appearance of massive trench lines. Once lines were established, the area in between the sides was called no man's land. This was a hellish landscape covered in barbed wire, landmines, and craters, and enemy machine gunners would have sectors of fire with overlapping coverage, and artillerymen would have the complete area dialed in. The most horrific job, then, was the one given to the officers who had to push their men out of the trenches for those famous frontal assaults through no man's land, which unfortunately happened way more often than you would think. The Battle of Minbom was really inspired by this type of warfare. The battle itself was really just a continuation of another battle that had started during the Clone Wars. The clones that had fought alongside with the Minbonese against the Separatist Alliance soon became the enemies of the locals when they refused to leave after the rise of the Empire. The trench warfare that followed was every bit as terrifying as World War I, except the weapons are even more deadly. Han Solo was a member of the 224th Armored Division, an Imperial Army swamp trooper unit. His commanding officer was a man named Major Stas, and he was a true believer in every way. What was rare about Commander Stas was, as a commander of an entire division, that's around 10,000 to 15,000 men, he actually led from the front, which usually doesn't happen with such high-ranking officers. Major Stas never seemed to question why his division was on this swampy world and fighting this terrible battle, and he ultimately would get disintegrated by a Minbonese missile. The lesson here is, if you have an officer telling you to cross no man's land, he most likely is a true believer. Wait until he's not looking and shoot him in the back of the head. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. Please check out the description too if you guys want to donate to Army SOS. It is truly an amazing cause. Well guys, I'll see you next time.